There for Care is brought to you by CareScout with the goal of sharing real-life conversations about aging care. Views expressed on this program are the speaker's own. We do not provide medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice. Always talk to your own professional advisors for advice tailored to your needs.
Home ownership is not just about the place, it's security. Not being seen, not being cared for, not having someone by your side, not having someone to know what's going on with you.
You recently moved your grandfather from Florida to here in Richmond, Virginia. Can you just tell us a little bit about the process?
He had gotten pneumonia. I think that moment of being ill and being alone was a moment of reconciliation for him. My grandmother was able to pass away in their home, and that is a gift that I also want for my grandfather. There are parts of this that are emotional and there are parts that are logical. And you have to find that balance in between to really get to care and love.
Hi, welcome to the There for Care podcast by CareScout, a podcast all about aging care, whether it's for yourself or for those that you love. I'm Amy Rein, and today we have Jamala Arland joining us. Jamala brings years and years of leadership and experience in the long-term care industry. But for today's conversation, the lens she's bringing is that of a granddaughter. Super excited to hear about a recent experience that Jamala had with her grandfather and about all the learnings that she took from that experience and how she thinks about care and caring for loved ones. So with that, welcome, Jamala.
Thank you, Amy. I'm excited to talk about granddad.
Yes, yes. So you recently moved your grandfather from Florida to here in Richmond, Virginia. Can you just tell us a little bit about the process?
Yeah. Before we jump into the process, I have to tell you about who he is to me, because he is such a special person in my life and he's been a constant through my whole life. When I was growing up, so I'm originally from Barbados. That's where I was born and raised. He and my grandmother, they had their career in London in the UK. And my mom, she did her master's there soon after I was born. So I spent my first 2 years of life in my grandparents' home with my parents. So I feel like the connection that I have with him and with my grandmother was always so fundamental and foundational to who I am and who I became. And as I became an adult, moving to the U.S., where he and my grandmother, they retired to Florida. When I moved to the U.S., you know, they were my only family connection here. So I saw them a lot on holidays and weekends. And over time, I got to know them as people, and my grandfather in particular, especially as my grandmother developed dementia. There was this moment where I realized that my conversations, like, she'd be the one who would answer the phone, or if he answered, he would hand the phone to her pretty quickly. And then more and more, she was handing the phone to him. That was almost like my first sign of her dementia. And in the conversations that I had with him, I got to know him a lot better as he was processing her life with dementia and what it meant for him and what it meant for their history, but also their future. So I actually learned a lot of their stories through him. And in him sharing their stories, he also shared his reflection. And he's somebody to me in my life who is just grounded in humanity and reflection. And he's also been, in some ways, a mirror where I can say, this is what I feel, and he would reflect that back to me, which is such a gift to receive, but also such a gift that he has as a person. And when I ask him like how he does that, he says, I've not always been like that. It's something that he's developed over time, but I think it also develops through experience, through challenges, through loss, through grief. And I really enjoy getting to know him as a person.
Yeah. So knowing that he is so reflective and introspective, and knowing that he was the caregiver to your grandmother and things like that, this move must have been big for him.
Yeah.
Can you, like, what did it look like to make that sort of transition with him?
Yeah. It's been a long conversation. And it started when my grandmother was still here. And there was a moment that where they had come to Virginia because there was an evacuation order in Florida where they lived because of a hurricane. So they drove up and they were staying with me and my husband. this was very early in my grandmother's dementia journey, so I hadn't really experienced the disorientation with her. And they came to our house and, she still knew who I was. And there was that excitement and greeting. And then when it was time to go to bed, she said, I wanted my bed. I want to go home. Where's home? Where's my bed? And she was very anxious. And I saw my grandfather calm her down and de-escalate that situation. We had started talking about if it made sense for them to move to be closer to our family. But really that moment for both me and him closed the conversation. And we both felt that the familiarity of her home environment was important for her life and her stability and her quality of life and her ease. So we closed that conversation for a while in that moment. My grandfather took great care of her in their home. And the special gift that he gave to her was that she was able to stay at home. He had caregivers come in, but he would often laugh and tell me that, the caregivers are like, okay, Mr. Rudy, you need to leave now. We've got her. But he would tell me, he would get her bathed and dressed and fed before the caregiver came to do the bathing and dressing, because he would say, she likes it done this way. She likes her hair brushed this way. She likes this meal. But it was still a respite for him to get out of the house, go get a coffee, go get groceries and things like that. But my grandmother was able to pass away in their home. And that is a gift. And that is a gift that I also want for my grandfather, to be able to live in his home, but then also to have that. I think there's a dignity in being in your home. And we reopened the conversation of him moving after she passed. It was slow, and it's been 5 years. It's been a 5-year conversation since she passed. And there've been things that have happened around him with other family members, and friends, where he was really alone in his home, and weighing that loneliness factor, but also, in some ways, there's a fear that comes with that loneliness. And as you age, not being seen, not being cared for, not having someone by your side, not having someone to know what's going on with you, and maybe sometimes even before you realize that there's something going on. I think that for him started to outweigh, being in Florida. And we reopened the conversation about him moving to Virginia. And when we had that conversation, we looked at different things. Can you stay in Florida and maybe move to an independent living community that has those step-up options as you may need it? Do you get a smaller house in Florida, someplace where you have that built-in community, maybe a 55 and older or 65 and older community where he has that social aspect and people who are there? And we closed the conversation again for a little while, and he had gotten pneumonia maybe a year or so ago. And I think that moment of being ill and being alone was a moment of reconciliation for him as he thought about priorities. So we started that conversation again, and it quickly got to, yes, he's going to move to Virginia. He loves being around my husband and I and our son. And my grandfather and my son are like the joy of my heart when I see them together, and when I see them playing, and when I see the light and energy and happiness that they both have when they're together. That's something that you can't replicate.
Yeah. So what is it like? What was it like to work with your grandfather through the process of moving? Because it wasn't the house he was moving out of wasn't a house he had been in for a few years. Like it was a house they had been in for years, where he had this deep experience caregiving for your grandmother. I'm sure he had plenty of other memories and friends. Like what was it like helping him and or watching him sort of reconcile with the fact that that was not going to be his home anymore?
Yeah. Once we got to, the conversation of moving, it was very quick. And he actually outpaced me at one point where he was like, I'm ready. And I'm like, oh, I'm not ready. But when it comes to, the conversation about home, that one was interesting for me because at one point, I just thought about it as the place. This is the place where you put your things, you sleep. It's your kind of the place that you go back to. But there's so much more in that going back, which goes to the memories that you raise. It goes to those things and how you feel about those things. And as we were talking about home, we went through a couple options. So I suggested to him very logically, maybe you should consider renting. Because if you're renting, then all your liquidity is not tied up in a house. That was just off the bat a no for him, which really surprised me. As we talked through it, I learned something else about what was important to him. And when he had moved to England in his early 20s, buying a home and having that solid, this is mine, was something that was transformational for him. And the idea of going back to not having this place that was his was not something that he was comfortable with. And when we talked through that, that made sense to me, right? Home ownership is not just about the place or the thing. It's security. It is part of personhood for people, for people who have had that. And it's security. And all those things were tied up in home ownership for him. So once I understood that aspect of how he thought about his home, it just made the conversation a lot easier. It's not just about the logic of what financially may make more sense, but it's about his overall comfort, not just in the space, but that emotional and mental perception of what moving forward means and not moving backwards. The idea of renting felt to him like a step backwards from where he had been in his life. And that wasn't something that he wanted. Yeah. And, so understanding that and accepting that and not trying to convince him logically with the numbers of, was something that I had to move past and stop doing to allow the journey to unfold in a way that was respectful and also, appreciative of what mattered to him on this journey.
Yeah. So as he created his new home here in Virginia, what was that process like? What, when you go to his house now, how does that compare to his place in Florida and your memories? Talk about that.
Yes. Yeah. So we decided to build a new house for him. And we went through the process. We had an excellent realtor, and she's someone who's a friend. And the reason that I thought that she might be a good realtor for him, one, she is from the UK, to her family background, has a Caribbean heritage. So there's that combination of connection to things that are familiar to him, but also culturally, that cultural competence and awareness in our realtor of who this person was. This is a man who left the Caribbean in his youth, had his career in the UK, and moved to the U.S. to retire for his retirement, who is now, looking at relocating again. And I think that her being able to relate to who he is and his experiences was something that made the process helpful. So she calls him granddad too now. Yes. It evolved from Mr. Burkett to granddad over time, which I really loved, but also was a little bit jealous of. But so finding the right person to help you along this journey was a really important step. And then we went through the process when we looked at different types of housing. A condo, we looked at existing homes, new construction. He immediately ruled out condo because I didn't make the connection. A condo feels like a hotel or an apartment. And that feeling did not feel like home to him. That's a great option, but it didn't feel like home to him. And that's the thing, right? Renting, home ownership, they're great options, but it has to feel like home to the person. And we ultimately decided on new construction for a variety of reasons. But what new construction brought to the process was that the community was building all together. Everybody on his street moved in within days of each other, which was instant community for him. And that was one of the things. Yes. That was one of the things that he wanted to solve for. The funny thing, he told me a story. He was taking his trash can down like the first day of trash collection for him. And he's like, all of a sudden, like 4 neighbors came out all to say hi to him. And he said, which was a little bit overwhelming, but also really, really a great experience. And also, just again, that creation of community, that instant community and friendship, because everybody is coming from the same place. And one of his reflections in that conversation is that even though there were some people who were from the Richmond area who were moving into this community, they still felt centered and realigned to the community that they were in, even though that they were already in a community. And a lot of people were moving to be closer to family, or because they'd had an experience with a spouse or a sibling or a parent that made them think about what is the right thing to do now as I'm preparing for, preparing for my future. That's really what it is, preparing for my future. And so that was really great for him on that first day. But going back to one of the cool things about the process of new construction is that as we were going through the design selection options, and working with him and seeing the choices that he was making, he's an excellent designer, by the way. We were very in sync. Like, I let him go first, and then he'd be like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I would have picked. But as we were putting all the things together, like picking the flooring, the cabinets, what started to come together was a feel and a color scheme that was very similar to the home that my grandmother had built 30 years ago. So when we moved his things in, and which was their things, it felt like their home. It was modern. It has all the amenities for aging in place, wide hallways. All the doorways are wheelchair accessible, grab bars everywhere, infinity shower. All the things that you can think about to make a great aging in place home space, but it still felt like home. And I think one of the cool decisions that he made that's a centerpiece in their living room, my grandmother had this giant glass credenza that the movers were like, uh-oh. Both when they were taking it out of the house and when, they were like, we are nervous that this may not make it all the way from Florida to Virginia. And then when they were to bring it out, it survived. Not surprised. But and my grandmother filled it with these very intricate, like crystal and ceramic and china ornaments and figurines. And that was her thing. Like, she just loved those, pretty dainty little things. And at one point he said, no, I'm not going to bring that. It's too big. It's too chunky. I don't need those things. And then he decided to bring it. And when he set it up in the living room and put all those pieces on the shelf, like, it was like, yes, this piece has to be here. This piece is part of your home. And it was central in his old home, and it's central in his new home. And that's the connection. I feel that connection to my grandmother when I see that.
Yeah. Talking about that sort of curation, right, of the collection when you're moving, when you're helping someone that you love move locations and stuff like that. What was that process? Were you involved, or did you get a sense of how he was making those decisions about what had to come and what could maybe go?
Yes.
Yeah.
The interesting thing with the packing process was that I was encouraging him to wait. We had, the house was being built, and we had a schedule where I was going to go to Florida. I was going to help him just make some decisions about what stays and what goes. And then the movers would come. They would pack it all up to make sure it was all packaged nicely and would survive the move. And then we would get in the car and drive to Richmond. That was the plan. And along the way, as I'm talking to him and we're FaceTiming, I'm like, Granddad, where's the picture that was on that wall? He was taking things down and packing them up and making decisions. And he would say, I'm going to bring this. I'm going to bring this. And I was like, Granddad, well, let's wait for the movers so that they can pack the stuff up. But he was making those decisions intentionally every day along the way. So by the time I got there, he had pretty much packed up everything. And he did an excellent job because nothing broke. Nothing broke.
That's amazing.
I know. Yeah. And he made that intentional decision, even though he had said, no, I'm leaving those figurines. He packed them all up.
Did you get a sense of how he was making those decisions? Because you said that initially he said, I'm not going to bring all of that glass stuff. But then that absolutely made the trip with a tremendous amount of care. Like, did you get any sort of insight into how he was making those broader decisions, or could you make a guess, or how do you facilitate that? Or
one thing that was interesting as he was making decisions about what to bring that I observed was that there was a combination of logic, but also the nostalgia that went into his decisions. And some of them were surprising and kind of funny when we talked through things. So he was leaving behind, my grandmother had several sets of dining ware. And she's a special person too. And the two of them together, she had several sets of dining ware, and he was very decisive. I am not taking all of these. And at one point he said, I just need one plate and one fork. And I said, Granddad, but I think you need at least 4 for when my husband and my son and I, come over so we can eat with you. And we kind of had this laugh at one moment. He's like, yes, I do plan to entertain and have people over and be social. So I do need more than one plate and one fork, but there were these moments where, he sometimes he would go from one extreme of, I only need one plate, to he packed up 2 sets of, end tables and coffee tables. Mm-hmm. I'm like, Granddad, now you only have one living room in your new house. So which one do you like better? And he's like, oh, yes. He's like, so there were moments where he forgot that the new house was a little bit smaller because he liked both sets of end tables and coffee tables, and they're both really lovely. Mm-hmm. But we made a decision together about which one, would fit better in the space and really bring the space together. And so there were these moments where he was really decisive that I really loved for him. And I loved that he got to the space where he wanted to bring those pieces that felt so much like representations of my grandmother and her style, and then made very decisive decisions on the other side in terms of, things that were coming and were not coming. So
that sort of hyper practical.
Yes.
Right.
He had that swing sometimes between the logic and the emotional.
Yeah.
And helping him find the right balance at some points was, I enjoyed being that person for him where he could, bounce those ideas off of.
Yeah. So now that he's here and everybody's settling in, how are you sort of distilling this whole experience for yourself, for, your leadership role with Genworth? What are you taking from this? What are the lessons or learnings or contexts?
Yeah. There are parts of this that are emotional, and there are parts that are logical. And you have to find that balance in between to really get to care and love. I was looking and thinking about what does care mean? And I Googled it.
Yeah.
That's
what else would you do?
Exactly. Yeah. It was interesting, Amy, because I think about care as the action of giving something, but also receiving something. And then the feeling. The definitions were things like protection, supervision, anxiety, concern. And I was like, yes, all those things come in to care. I think about that very much with my toddler. But when I think about my relationship with both of my toddler, with my husband, with my grandfather, there's more to care than the anxiety of wanting to protect the person. Yes, I want to, part of this move is protection and safety for my grandfather. But there's more than that. There's the love. There is the moments. He said to me yesterday, because he came over for dinner because he's 10 minutes away. Oh. And he got in his car to leave. My son and I, we were sitting on the front porch, yelling, bye, Granddad, which he was like, I love this. He got in the car and he was going to leave. Then he got back out and he came back over and he said, hey, Jamala, remember 2 weeks ago when you brought those breakfast sandwiches over and we just sat there and had breakfast together? Can we do that again soon? And I was like, yes. And that was something where it was more, that for me was more logical. Mm-hmm. He didn't have his fridge yet. So So I brought him breakfast and then we ate it together.
Yeah.
And it was a great moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of moved past that so quickly to the things, the decisions, the actions. And then just that moment of him getting back out of his car to say, can we do that again? I was like, yeah, I loved that. That was a great moment. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm really excited about having with him. I know every moment is not going to be that moment of just sitting across the table and having breakfast together. I know that part of this journey there will be hard moments to come if I can give him what he gave my grandmother. But for now, and even then, I want to find those nuggets of love, those nuggets of care, those nuggets of caring, those nuggets of us to hold on to and build. And remind myself of those things in those moments where it gets overwhelming, when it's like, okay, we got to do this for the mortgage. We got to sign up these bills. Because there's still a lot of things that we have to do for find his doctors. You know, there's still a lot of things that we have to do because we made such a big move. And when I go through my checklist of all those things, it is overwhelming. But I come back to that foundation of, we made a decision for him. Yes, safety, protection were part of it, but also care, experience, this future that he can have here with my family, with me, with my son, with my husband. He invited my husband over for a beer on Saturday. He didn't call me. He called my husband, was like, you want to come have a beer? And my husband was like, yeah. Yes, I will not say no to a beer. And they just sat out and drank a beer. You know, like those are things and experiences that are so meaningful. And even to how my husband is embracing this journey is so special, because he's not like, this is your grandfather, your family. And this is the first time that I've had that with him, because my family's in a different country, that my husband has had the space to embrace my family. So there's all these special moments and these new things that are very meaningful, to balance along with the logic and the checklist and the things that you have to do. But when I think about it professionally, just having this broader awareness for what our customers, what their caregivers are dealing with, and just the acknowledgement that everybody's going through something, and maybe going back to where we started, that opportunity to be a mirror for somebody else of what they're feeling, and giving them space to feel what they're feeling, and creating environments where people can feel care.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story. A lot of what I heard resonates with a lot of what CareScout is, advocates for in terms of agency in aging, right? And I think the experience that you had and making sure that your grandfather had both sort of the scaffolding, support and the space to make his own decisions, to build this new space and this new chapter of his life close with you. It's really special. And I appreciate you sharing it with us today.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. That's been the There for Care podcast by CareScout. Please share with all your friends that are navigating the caregiving journey for themselves or for their loved ones. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.